Tragedy of Nokia? Nokia invented the smartphone.
Well, you've probably heard people say this in the past, like, oh, this one's going to be taught in economics classes for years to come. It'll be in the book. And the book we're talking about today actually has all of those in there. It's really quite a fascinating book about, I would say, corporate strategy, but it can also be applied to small business, to anything that you're doing in your own life, really, with some of the formulas that are in here. I had a fun reading. It's called The Wide Lens, written by Ron Adner, and he's with us now. Ron, thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me.
I got to tell you, I really, really like this, and for a number of reasons. The first one, I can now be so cool at cocktail parties where I can say, let me tell you what went wrong with Nokia. I mean, here's how these guys really screwed it up. And this is fun, Ron. This is, I think a lot of these types of books that talk about strategy for companies, talks about successes. Like here's how they did it. I've read the story about 3M and how the engineer discovered the sticky note paper. But this really shows some recent examples of stuff that went really, really wrong, certainly from a financial perspective for some big corporations. But you also show really simple ways how they could have avoided that. Now, I know you're a professor of strategy. Is this your first book about strategy?
Yes.
Okay, well, congratulations.
I mean, I've written lots of articles and done a lot of research, but this is the first book.
Okay, so tell me how you started putting this together. Is this your basic overall theory?
Yeah, so this is so I'm a business school professor, right? I've been working on issues of strategy and innovation for about almost 20 years. But 10 years ago, I really started paying attention to this puzzle, which is in some ways the core of this book, the puzzle of why great innovations fail. Right, so we have a lot of people talk about why it's hard to get great innovations, and we have a lot of books about why companies make stupid decisions and they don't listen to their customers, or they don't know how to manage, and so they're poorly organized. But I was struck by the issue that sometimes you have really great innovations where people are checking all the right things in all the right boxes and really doing excellent work, and still we have failure. And in some ways, that's the core of this book, right? So for the last 10 years, what I've been doing work on is trying to understand what are these other factors that are missing. And that's this notion behind the wide lens, which is we need to expand our perspective beyond what we usually think of as important for success.
It's funny because I ran a publicly listed company in the mid-90s, and I remember one thing that the shareholders would always say is, we want you guys to have a laser beam focus on executing and doing everything right. And this is really perpendicular to that.
Well, the message in the book is that great execution is necessary for success, but it's not sufficient. And this is what I call the innovation blind spot. This is what people keep missing. It's not that they're bad at execution and that they shouldn't be good. They should be excellent at execution. But more and more, when organizations, right, for-profits, non-profits, large companies, small companies, when they're laying out their strategies for growth and success, they're putting more and more partners into the mix. Right? What that means now is, and so what's exciting about that is when you bring on partners, you can do things together that you couldn't do alone. And that's what we highlight in terms of the benefits of collaboration. But the back end of collaboration is that now there's dependence, right? And what this means is that you can do a great job, but if the partner you're depending on didn't do a great job, all your work doesn't really count. And so the notion of the wide lens is to understand this dependence, right? Which first means you need to see it, right? Because often we're dependent in ways that we don't recognize, or at least don't recognize explicitly. And then, the positive message in the book is once you see it, you can change the way you manage, the way you strategize to act on it and manage it and increase your odds of success.
And I really like so of course, with any good strategy book or anything that tries to help you, in this case, really see what you need to be looking at. I love the kind of the law of the probability, particularly with partners. With if you wouldn't mind, if you can condense that, just explaining what your percentages of success is when you have like 4 different partners.
Sure. the core intuition here goes against our experience. If you go to a meeting and you see 4 competent, excited, successful partners saying, you know what, we're going to collaborate on this thing, and we're going to put all our effort into this. Usually what we do is we walk out and we say, well, we should be pretty confident because all these people are good, right? In general in life, everything we do revolves around averages. So you have 4 confident people, you walk out saying we should have a good outcome. But the nature of collaboration is one that really, it's about joint probability. It's not about you doing a good job, it's you doing a good job and me doing a good job. Right? And so what that means, if you go back to high school math, you'll remember that if you flip a coin, heads are a fair coin, it's 50% that you get heads and 50% that you get tails. Now, if you and I both collaborate, and there's a 50-50 shot that I succeed in my part of the puzzle, and there's a 50-50 shot that you succeed in your part of the puzzle, well, how confident should you be that we're going to succeed? And the answer is not 50%. Right? We shouldn't average. We know that, it's 1/2 times 1/2. So it's 1/4. 1 out of 4 times will succeed. So it's 0.25%. And every time you add another partner to a mix, that's essentially what you're doing, is you're multiplying, you're adding another multiple. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't participate in these collaborations, right? Not at all. The whole book is about how to, gives the tools for how to do this successfully. But it means as a starting point, you should recognize that as you collaborate, you're adding fragility to this system. And so, so 0.5 times 0.5, that's 0.25. You add another partner, you're down to 0.125, right. And so on and so on.
Right.
And that's the law of probability that governs collaboration, that if you don't recognize that, you're just going to set the wrong expectations. Right? If you walk out of that meeting and say, well, there's a 50-50 chance that we succeed, wonderful, you're going to be making one kind of bet. Right? You'll be requiring one kind of potential payoff if you succeed. If you knew from the start there's a 10% chance of winning, it doesn't mean you wouldn't make the bet. You just say, wow, if the odds are 10%, the kind of payoff I want or the way I'm going to structure my investment will be very different. So that's the beginning of the why.
So there's, I think there's 4 key areas that you focus on, and you have different examples for each of these cases. And in my mind, there's a lot that comes down to timing. This is obviously this is a huge part of why some great ideas are. We just say, oh, they were just too early. I myself have been, just too early with certain things, and. Yet there's another side to this, which I think other types of business books would argue, saying really it comes down to marketing succeeding effectively, and and I'm not saying I agree with this, by the way, and that the marketing department is the one who, like in the case of the Michelin's Run Flat fiasco, it should have been their job to make sure they were marketing to the dealers and the people who were going to be retrofitting tires, etc. How do you feel about that?
Well, I would say 2 things. So first of all, yes, right? Clearly, marketing plays an important role. But there are 2 key things that change when you move into this world of collaborative innovation, right? So the thing that stays the same is you still need to execute, right? You still need to understand what the customer wants, and you still need to deliver that well. But when you add collaborators into the mix, we find 2 different kinds of risks. The first kind of risk is this notion of co-innovation risk. Right, where we ask the question of, okay, you need to innovate. Does anyone else need to innovate for your work to matter? Right, so if you're out there and you're Sony racing Samsung to be first to market with your 3D TV that everybody thinks is going to be so cool, what co-innovation says is, you know what? It doesn't really matter if you're first to market if we don't have 3D content. Because, and this is kind of the first mover discussion, it's the difference between running a race to be first to the starting line as you're waiting for all these other partners to show up with their co-innovations, or really a race to the finish line. So in some ways, no matter how great Sony's marketing is, if there's for the TV, if there's no content, it's a non-issue. Now, given that the elements are in place, that the other innovations are in place, then we face this issue of what you're talking about as marketing, what I talk about in terms of the adoption chain. right? And the real message there is usually when we think about marketing, we think about understanding what the end customer wants, what the consumer wants, and convincing them that they should really value our product. And here the message is, often when we collaborate, we have collaborators that aren't just producing innovations that work with ours, but also they're handing off our product. Right? There's a chain of players between us and the end customer. And we need to make sure that each one of them wants to participate as well. So marketing essentially needs to expand beyond the end customer to each one of the partners in this collaboration to make sure that they all see success. And so the the cute line is that in a world of standalone innovation, in a product world, the innovator's job is to find the win-win. Like, it's good for them, good for the end customer. But if you have a partner, you have to find the win-win-win. You can't have a situation where it's a win-lose-win. You love it, the end customer loves it, but the intermediary doesn't like it because the customer will never get a chance to see it.
Right, right.
So it expands the responsibility of marketing. It also means
that's
marketing.
Actually here, I love your little circles
Thanks.
here that shows that you have one break in the chain and then you completely lose. However, you can have little small wins in the chain and you win big time. And believe me, for a guy who didn't go to school, I'm like, oh, okay, I get this. This is cool. It just makes so much sense.
Well, I'm glad it's supposed to.
Yeah. There's a number of examples. Of course, we have the Amazon Kindle for ebooks, and we have the iPod for portable digital music for MP3 players. The way I feel about it is you had two, obviously, geniuses who had the vision and the foresight and held back and waited until they had all of the win-win-win pieces in place. That's, of course, Jeff Bezos at Amazon and Steve Jobs at Apple. And I truly believe that they understand, and Steve Jobs, they both have kind of the same strategy. Let's own as much of the value chain as we can and only rely on as few outside partners as possible. But here's the question, Ron. When it starts to go wrong, this is where I think I've seen, and I actually dealt with Nokia a lot when they were kind of going through this whole conversion to 3G, and they're very early with all the right bits and pieces, but it just didn't make it. And I was actually in Finland, and I spoke to a lot of people there. That's when, I mean, is it even possible to stop a big steamship like that and say, we got to put on the brakes, we've done something wrong, we've missed a key piece? Can that be turned around?
So I will answer that in two ways, right? So the easy answer is, of course, if you had thought this through in the right way before you started, you'd have to make a much smaller adjustment. And so that's an argument for, if I go back to your the previous comment, you'd want to get those marketing people on board as you're setting the strategy to get their input to really understand what these stakeholders want. So a good plan will need less adjustment. The bigger challenge which you're throwing out, which is, look, once we've moved down this road, can we adjust? I would push it back and say, how can you afford not to? Right? I mean, the tragedy of Nokia invented the smartphone.
Yeah.
1996, they had the communicator. You could email on this handset. Apple, depending on how you count it, is either 6 or 12 years late to that game. Nokia invested in apps before, Apple even had an iPod. They spent a fortune on Symbian. They had everything in place in terms of the pieces. But what they missed was two things. First, they missed how to link the elements together. But the other is, I think they missed how, as you're bringing new elements into the mix, you need to adjust what you do. Right? So I'll explain what I mean by that. For the listeners, behind a lot of these stories, behind every one of these stories, there's an actual tool to do the analysis, right? So it's not just how to crack the case that we're talking about, but that you can apply yourself, right? And so the key tool in the book is called the value blueprint, which is this idea of mapping out who are all the partners you have and how they come together. When Nokia moved, when the idea moved from having standalone cell phones, handsets, to adding software to them, one critical actor that was added to the mix was the developer. Right? Because Nokia wasn't going to develop all their apps themselves, the same way Apple didn't. Well, Initially they did, and they expanded it. That's a different story. Now, what's the conflict that took place is that a strategy to succeed in a standalone product world, so Nokia's great strength came from the fact that they could manage variety in handsets better than anyone else in the world. Right? They could produce customized handsets with customized features and icons, etc., for operators throughout the world at lower cost than anyone. That's great, unless you're a developer. Because if you're a developer, and now I'm telling you, I've got 10,000 different phones with 10,000 different configurations, that's a whole lot harder to develop for than what Apple essentially did, which is, you know what, I make one phone. Operators weren't so thrilled that there was no variety there, but Apple shifted the locus of customization and variety purely to the software side. Right now, if Nokia had understood that developers were the key, I suspect that they could have made developing for their platform simpler and had an easier, not an easy, but an easier time in getting people on board. Remember, they started 10 years before Apple. But I don't think that they saw the big vision, but they didn't break it down in the way that, kind of I'm prescribing in this book. Take it step by step, element by element, and really understand what underlies the win. Right? The thing that makes that the win-win-win story difficult is that the way each partner wins can be completely different and unrelated to another partner.
What you're saying about Nokia and Apple is very interesting. We just had an announcement from Apple. Now we have new CEO Tim Cook, and they've actually made a departure from this one phone strategy where they now, unless you have the iPhone 4S, you will not be able to get turn-by-turn directions. The dictation won't work. Siri already, Siri already doesn't work on the 4. So actually, from a developer standpoint, you now actually have to think about, hold on a second, I can't develop with backwards compatibility. Would you say this is a stumble on their part?
I would say this is probably an explicit choice. Mm-hmm. Whether it's a good move or not, if I have one concern about Apple, which, as you know, I am a huge fan of, and the whole end of the book is devoted to why, to the magic that Steve Jobs had that I don't think most people really understand or appreciate. But the warning there is they have such a strong position in their system because of the way in which they built it up, right? And so today everybody looks at Apple and say, wow, they're doing everything. And the thing to remember is in the beginning they did hardly any. They hardly had any collaboration. Their strength really came from the way in which they built off of that basic footprint. Today, where I'm worried about Apple is if they're becoming too aggressive as a leader, right? So, the message about ecosystem leadership is that what makes the leader is the followers, right? It's because people are willing to follow you that you can be a leader.
Right.
And the question is, well, what enticements can you give them for them to be willing to give up all the goodies that come with contending for leadership? We've seen Apple kind of overstep the bounds a couple of times, right? Like when they changed the terms for subscriptions for content. To the publisher, suddenly, you need to give the lowest rates, guaranteed, has to be through the platform, and then we saw them step back from that. But clearly, they're trying to move the system in one direction, kind of breaking away from the backwards compatibility is, I think, their way of trying to get people to move up.
Well, forced upgrade.
To force people to upgrade. And they're willing to take heat for it. So I don't think they've yet overstepped the bound on that.
But there's potential for that.
But there is a risk. Yeah, that's the risk of the successful leader. It's not just that some other leader is going to come out there and be better than you. It's that you just that you lose the ability to induce people to follow you. And unlike the case in 2008, 2009, where really, the iPhone was the only successful, attractive smartphone platform. Today, we have at least one other one, and one or two others waiting in the wings. So there are alternatives for people.
So in the broad space of, let's just say, content creation on the internet, I've been doing this for a long time. in some cases I've been a followers, but usually wind up feeling getting locked out or pressured. In fact, I would argue that almost everybody who uses a social network like Twitter or Facebook, they are in fact following that company. They're allowing for a platform. But I see that I guess what my question is, what do you think the elements would be for a company to be very successful in really monetizing content on the internet, which is absolutely not done right now? There's a groundswell of huge talent, possibility, and resources that is really just being turned into hamsters by most companies. What would it take to really turn that, hundreds of millions of people into a real resource in partnership with a company? Because everyone's trying to do this.
I'm not sure everyone's trying to do that in the same way.
Okay.
Right? And so if you think about it, so again, think about the way in which the different players win, right? The way in which they see their success. If you think about Apple, right? So if you think about Apple, how does Apple make their money? Right? They make their money from hardware sales. They have a wonderful app store, they sell lots and lots of songs, they sell lots of apps, but those are rounding error on what their profit driver is. Right? If you think about what would Apple's, the ideal price for a song when they were first selling the iPod, probably zero.
Yeah.
Right? Because any money you don't spend on songs, you can spend on hardware.
Yeah, it's pretty much a wash, the cost of their infrastructure versus what they make.
It's not their, that's not their profit engine. Right? You think about Amazon. Right? The way Amazon makes their money is by selling content. Right? They don't make their money off the hardware. They subsidize the hardware so that they can make money over time with the content. Right? So that's actually an example. I know Amazon has all kinds of other issues that make them a challenging partner, but at the base of it, they make money by selling content. And so you can imagine, well, since publishers, content creators, want to make money from content, and here's a player that makes money from selling content, that seems to be greater alignment than someone who doesn't care about making money from content and makes their money some other way. What that means, so this is the question of smart followership, right? So we have, some players can come out there and really lead with their platforms. Others don't have a chance at leading, but they need to choose whom to follow. And one of the litmus tests that I offer here is make sure that they win the same way you do.
Right.
And I think, if you were, again, as a big fan of Apple, I say this because every time you criticize Apple, people come out of the woodwork.
Yeah.
But, if you were to survey Apple's partners, the music companies, not really pleased in retrospect with the deal they signed.
No.
The operators, AT&T, they made money, they won, but they're kind of an unhappy follower at this point. It's been interesting that the video space, Hollywood has not signed those kinds of deals with Apple, right? That's why we still don't have Apple TV, etc. But there's people who understand to look at the structure of the win-win will make different decisions than people who just look at something attractive and shiny, say, wow, because they're successful, we want to partner with them. Right? You want to make sure that the way you succeed is aligned.
Well, speaking of Amazon, I just want to let everyone know that you can pick up this book. If you're watching this in the app, just tap on the blue button overhead or click on the link down below to pick up The Wide Lens by Ron Adner. It's actually subtitled A New Strategy for Innovation. I totally agree with this. And I don't want to let you go yet, Ron, because I want to just throw out a couple company. I have three questions, really. First, two company names. I want to ask you if you've analyzed them and if you think their strategy gels with what you're thinking of. And the first one would be Facebook.
I haven't spent that much time on Facebook.
Okay.
But I will give you the kinds of questions I would ask if I were digging in. And what they would really focus on is, so what's the real value proposition that they're offering? And how does that connect to the partners that they have? right? So are you making your money off of apps? Are you making your money off of advertising? Are you making your advertising off of directed placements? And what does that mean for the partners you need to bring on board? You have the macro issue, you have privacy issues, how sustainable that is. But from a distant observation, it looks to me like they're actually doing quite well.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Because they are, I mean, what's interesting about them is they're not that dependent, right? So they have what looks to be a very robust, what I call the minimum viable footprint. They've been careful about adding additional pieces. And if any one of those pieces disappears tomorrow, like their relationship with Zynga, it seems that the partners are far more dependent on Facebook than vice versa.
How about their relationship to their audience, though? It seems like it's a very fickle audience that has, limited loyalty.
So this is the big concern with them is the classic concern, right? Of are you doing what the customer wants you to do? And here, I think, in some ways, Apple has been aggressive with the terms that they put on their partners, and in some ways on their customers. Facebook has been relatively aggressive with what it is that they've been doing with their customers. And just like we said, there's a line that Apple would cross. There's no question that there's a line that Facebook could cross. Hasn't crossed it yet. And I think the real question there is whether it's Facebook that will cross the line or the line that will move on Facebook. Like suddenly everybody says, oh my God, privacy, getting all this information. What had been acceptable 5 years ago no longer becomes acceptable, and then they've got to. But again, it's something that it's theirs to lose.
So my second question, not so much about a company, more about an industry, one that we all saw coming going back to late 80s even, which is the business of news. And I mean, I think you could write an entire book about this alone. For me, it's very obvious what went wrong, but maybe you have some insights on that. And what is the future of news? Do you have any thought about that?
Well, not that much, other than to say there's no question that we will always have news. Right? The question is really what's the value that we put on it. And we've got combinations of free news because everybody wants to go out and report, and then we have news with influence, which is people are willing to subsidize news in order to put their own spin on it. There, I suspect it's a little bit related to the Facebook story of will the line shift, right? Will we get to a point of if you go back to the time of Pulitzer, right? He was a big yellow journalist. The idea of slanted news.
People don't know this, by the way.
I mean, people, right? So there was a time where most news in America was completely biased, and then there was a pushback. Right, and so that again is like the pushback on privacy. Will there be a pushback or not? And the real question is, are you willing to pay a premium to
get something that
to get the guarantee of quality?
Right.
Right. So it's interesting, right? It's not are you willing to pay a premium for quality, because there's lots of free quality. It's are you willing to pay a premium for the guarantee? And there, so 2 years ago, I was watching, the State of the Union address, right? And you had all the networks out there, all their cameras and all their people, all their microphones, and you really could have had just one, right? They're all capturing the exact same thing, right? And so there's also the question of what is news and where should differentiation in news come from? So that's not a real answer.
No, but it's very valuable what you said there. Actually, I like that. You're willing to pay for the guarantee. I think that is really key here. And in the case of the State of the Union, I mean, that's really about the analysis. The analysis comes from all these different pieces. Ron, you're a very, very smart dude for sure. And by the way, if you look at the back of the book here, let me just I won't read the entire quotes, but I'll just give you some of the people here. The president CEO of eBay, John Donahue. Jeff Immelt, from chairman and CEO of General Electric Corporation, Jeff Moore. I mean, these are some major endorsements.
I've been very fortunate.
Yeah, you now, do you have any idea how the book is doing? I mean, do you get reports? I mean, is it selling? It must be doing great.
Hey, it could always be doing better. So, everybody.
Yeah, sure. Well, we hope to contribute in some small way. Now,
but what I'll say is so the first chapter of the book, the Michelin story, is online. It's on the book website. The whole chapter. People are more than welcome to not just read but share with their friends. And so I'll tell you, my priority with writing this book is, so I'm a professor, right? So I've got a regular job. And my job is, I have the luxury of having a lot of time to study a lot of things and come up with perspectives. So really, more than the sales of the book, my dream is that the perspective gets shared, because I really think if people, walk through this framework, they would be able to be much more effective. They waste a lot less time, a lot less resources on things that you can tell in advance won't work. And then they could, really double down on the things that have a better shot of working, that will just their projects and investments.
So have you, I'm sure you've been approached, I don't know if you've done any, but you seem like the perfect guy for some huge corporation to ask to come in and consult them on their big strategy. This must be alluring.
So I do that.
Nice.
And it's, it's very, very gratifying to see how people can take these tools. And again, the book has got, I spent a lot of time trying to make it very engaging, and the story is really intriguing. But at the core of it are these tools for how to ask questions about your project. And I think, in a day or two, you can just ask these questions and see an awful lot of additional daylight where previously there had been mystery. Because the whole notion behind this wide lens is to have a structured way of asking the question of what else. And what it lets you do is it lets you change the kinds of debates that you have in a team about not whether this is a good idea or a bad idea. Right? Remember, the whole book is about why great ideas don't work.
Right.
Right? So often the debate is, well, why I think it's a great idea, and then when you say you don't like it, you're questioning me. Whereas what this framework is going to let you do is it's going to let you identify the one assumption that we disagree on. And then we can fight about that. We know exactly where to go to get additional information, or what to question, or how to change timing to make sure that that works out.
Well, I'm going to make a call out right now. Steve Ballmer, Larry and Sergey, you guys need to read this book. You need to give Ron Adner a call, because you're going to be screwed if you don't. Ron, I'm not kidding. I mean, I've in my mind, I'm reading this book, I'm like, oh my God, Microsoft is so screwed. Oh, these Google guys, I don't think they're doing it right. But of course, it's easy for me to sit here and say that. Really appreciate your time, and I look forward to what you're coming out with next. Are you already working on something?
Yeah, so actually, one of the things I'm thinking about is how to explicitly translate what's in here to more the nonprofit sector.
Oh, great.
Because I think, if you look at both at the policy level and at the activity level, any innovation that we're talking about in the world of education, in the world of healthcare, which is kind of mixed profit, nonprofit, energy reform, all those things rely on this notion of collaboration. And then clearly anything to do with social change has the same thing. So that's one extension of the set of ideas. And then some other strategy issues that come up that aren't ready for prime time.
Good. Well, I look forward to it. Oh, and I should mention, if you want to know what Obamacare is all about, you also need to read this book. The light bulbs will be going off everywhere in your head. Ron, I really appreciate it. Thanks again, and I hope to have you back on the show whenever your next book comes out.
Oh, I'd love it, Adam.
Okay. Thank you.